My granddad in the old country, he lived in came out of a little village called Santa Nicola, and it was in the province of Reggio. And he learned the apprenticeship of working leather under an old Italian cobbler or shoemaker. And my grandfather, I will never forget this story, he said, I had my cobbler's bench. I have a real early cobbler's bench. Came out of up in Pendleton County, and the Americans were just a continuation of what the European cobbler benches had been for hundreds of years. You had this round seat with a hole in it, and you tack a big piece of leather. So you sat there. Then the thing had a waist, and it spread out at the front. You had 4 legs on it, and you had all these little compartments for your nails and your cobbler tacks, and compartments to lay your knives and your hammers on. So you'd sit at your little cobbler's bench, and you had lasts to build the shoes on and to nail the soles, and so that was your fixture, was this cobbler's bench. And my grandfather said, my cobbler's bench was here, and my mentor, instructor, his apprentice he under was I think they were diagonal, something like this. And he said, that old man, he said, in those days, men didn't have zippers. You had a button-up fly. And he said, a lot of, that's another story we can get into. People, you didn't have a lot of undergarments. A lot of people did not wear undergarments. And my grandfather said one day, he said that old fellow was sitting there, and he said his seat had a big split in it. It was real old, and it had a big crack in it. And he said he was lasting a shoe up. He had this last on a frame, and he was building a shoe around the last form. And he said every time he'd hit that old last, he was putting the sole on, so he was really wailing away putting this leather sole on. And he said every time he'd hit that last, he said his private started slipping out of his crotch. And he said the next thing, he said, look, and he said his thing was hanging down under the seat, and he said we had a big cat. He said there was a big cat in the room, and he said I looked at that cat, and that cat was just totally like this. He said that cat. He said every time that thing would move, he said that cat would just move and closer. He said I didn't say that. He said finally that cat just reared back and wham, and he said that old fella about pulled the cat up out of the crack with his crotch. But anyway. About the time I was learning to play, my father announces to me, my dad, he said, your grandfather used to play the accordion. Nobody had ever said a peep about this. And my grandfather in the old country had lost 2 fingers. He'd had a shotgun blow up on him. And he always said it was because a brother of his had borrowed it and had overloaded it with smokeless powder was coming out. And these old muzzle-loading shotguns would not take the pounds per square inch that the modern powders were exerting on the, it was the weakest point was the barrels right up where you held your gun. And that shotgun they would fox hunt over in the old country, and they would eat them. They would night fox hunt, shoot foxes and eat them. And he said that gun barrel blew up, this barrel on this side blew up, and a big piece of the metal was probably what we call a Damascus barrel. It was made out of multiple pieces. It ruptured, and it came over and hit him so hard, it mangled these fingers so bad, he said he just had some bones sticking out. Oh. And he went to whoever the local doctor was, and they sawed everything off and pulled the skin up over. So I always knew him as this, and he was always that way, that left hand. Well, he could still play the accordion, and Dad said as time went on, he just didn't play anymore, and his old accordion fell apart. So in 1964, we ordered a Hohner accordion for him. So he got to play, December of 64, I think, or 5 we got it. I've got a picture of him the very time he opened the box, and he just has this wonderful smile on his face. Dad took the picture. My grandfather had no idea, what was in what the present was. And my grandfather just has this wonderful, sentimental expression of familiarity with what has uncovered. So he learned to play it again, and then one day, he said, Jim, he says, you learn it to play. And he gave it to me, and again, I didn't get to spend that much time with him. He died in April of '66. So this was some of the old things I can remember. His was a 2-row. You had other keys you could bar into.